You know, ladies and gentlemen, this morning we have an amazing opportunity. The U.S. FEMA Administrator, Brock Long, has graciously agreed to spend a few moments with us. Administrator Long, as all of us know, led the FEMA USAR responses to a series of natural disasters shortly after his assumption of command following his appointment by President Donald Trump. All of us who participated and all of us who supported those responses were impressed by his composure, professionalism, elegance, and especially for those of us in the fire service, his outstanding command presence. Administrator Long not only directed the largest responses in history effectively, he did it with a degree of skill and expertise that reset our expectations, reset the bar for excellence, which we greatly appreciate, recognize, and promise to match the next time he calls on us again to respond. We could not be more grateful to him and President Trump for allowing him to visit with us today here at FDIC, where more USAR members gather together than at any other event. Anybody on a USAR team stand up? You slackers, go sign up. Come on, you can stand up. Doug, are you standing? There you go. Good deal. Brock Long was confirmed by the U.S. Senate and began his career as the administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency in 2017. In 2011, he worked as executive vice president with Hagerty Consulting. He provided strategic direction to the leadership team in all their emergency management and professional programs. From 2008 to 2011, he served as the director of Alabama's Emergency Management Agency. I'm going to ask you, out of respect and to express our gratitude, that we please rise when we recognize a gentleman who supported us, who recognized us and gave us enthusiastic praise. All the USAR men and women, all the firefighters who, responding under his direction, rescued thousands of our fellow citizens when disasters struck. Brothers and sisters, our brother and boss, U.S. FEMA Administrator Brock Long.
I'm here as an instrument of peace. But every time I change jobs, something catastrophic happens. I can't quite figure it out. So literally, I got into emergency management through a conversation in college, and I left school, Appalachian State University in North Carolina. I got my first job in the state of Georgia Emergency Management Agency, and I literally moved all of my stuff into an apartment outside of Savannah, Georgia, the day before the Hurricane Floyd evacuations commenced from Florida to Delaware. I interviewed with FEMA Region 4 the first time I went to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I interviewed with FEMA on the morning of 9/11. I became Hurricane Program Manager of FEMA Region 4 in 2004, and the nation saw 4 major hurricanes in 6 weeks: Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean. And then the next year, we got Katrina. Obviously, when I come here, or when I go to Alabama, the director of Alabama Emergency Management Agency under Governor Bob Riley, I got Deepwater Horizon. And then when I come here, it's just been an amazing year. You don't even know where to begin. You don't even know how to put it into context. But it's an honor to serve. It's an honor to serve with you. My job is not a first responder. FEMA is not a first response agency, and we shouldn't be the primary response agency. My job is to harness the firepower of the federal government, to run it down through a governor to ultimately get to the incident command level at the local level, and that's you guys. That's you guys locally executing, making a difference, saving lives, and helping us out across this nation. We got a long way to go. A lot of people don't understand what my agency does and what it's responsible for doing. And so we're trying to change and simplify what it is. And I'm going to get to a strategic plan here in a minute that clearly defines our mission statement and where we're headed as an agency. But before we get into that, I want to look at some numbers to try to put forward what just happened in 2017, because it has a lot of ramifications for the way that we need to change things. So right off the bat, we estimate that 47 million Americans were impacted this year. 15% of the population was impacted by either Harvey, Irma, Maria, or the devastating California wildfires. The California wildfires is something that is one of the most disturbing events I've ever seen in my career, and I'm going to come back to it. I got a slide after this to break down what we think happened and what are some of the changes that need to occur as a result of going forward. But 47 million Americans had to pause. They had to stop. They either had to take action, they either had to shelter in place, they had to evacuate, or they lost their homes or were impacted in some way, shape, or form. Never before has the nation called upon firefighters, emergency managers, police officers, first responders in general, but also one of the most beautiful things that happened this past year was neighbor helping neighbor. Everything requires the whole community to come together, to be working in concert with one another to do the greatest good, to ultimately maximize a response and also maximize a recovery going forward, and that's what we witnessed as a nation. The USAR teams couldn't have performed more beautifully in this country. I couldn't be more proud of what we saw happen, and they were running nonstop. Not only did 28 teams activate to one of these 4 events that I talk about, but in the heat of battle, we also provided support to Mexico for the earthquake that was there as well. It's amazing what we were able to accomplish going forward, and while the numbers are off the charts, the USAR teams alone are credited with saving nearly 9,000 lives. Now, in your local communities, yeah. And I would argue that tens of thousands more were rescued or saved in other communities by you guys, the first responders, that haven't been accounted for and haven't put forward. The other thing that took place is that you guys went through over 30,000 structures. It's amazing how quick that we're moving, and we have to continue to figure out what went well versus where we need to change and improve on how we maximize our time and move even quicker for larger events, because I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to the low to no notice catastrophic events, which I'll get to here in a minute. For FEMA, the amount of support that went through, let me try to put this into context. We did more in a 6-month period than basically the agency performed over the last 10 years. So let's put that into context with the number of people that we entered into our individual assistance. So you'll see the number up there if you can't see it. Roughly 5 million people were put into our individual assistance system to be provided funding to kickstart their recovery. Those 5 million people, if you look back over the last 10 years, we've put about 10 million people into that system in 10 years. So over half, or about half of the people that we've worked with were registered in that 6-month time period. It was tremendous, a significant drain, on our abilities to put forward and render assistance. When it came to the amount of commodities that were pushed out, we put over $2 billion worth of food and water into Puerto Rico. It wasn't that we couldn't get food and water to Puerto Rico, it was we couldn't message it. And we learned something this year. We learned that it's not about interoperability anymore. It's about the ability to operate, period. We couldn't communicate. We couldn't communicate in Puerto Rico because the system, the communication system, which is the backbone of what we worked on, didn't work. The communication system was burned out in portions of the California wildfires as well. So forget interoperability for a minute. We got to figure out how to work with our private sector partners to make sure that we're building a communications backbone that is truly resilient and ready to withstand all hazards so that we can continue to push forward in our job. The California wildfires, let's break this down. The insurance industry, Swiss Re, and some of the other insurers, global insurers, are calling this fire, the 2 fires, or the multiple fires in California, the worst on the globe in the history, in recorded history, particularly when they look at insured losses. The numbers are off the charts. Thousands of homes were burned to the ground, and what we saw was that senior citizens were most heavily impacted. And there's a couple things that are going on here. One, the timing in which we're asking people to make life safety decisions and being able to evacuate. Getting a knock on the door at 1 a.m. in the morning is very tough for a senior citizen, and some of our senior citizens to adhere to be able to move very quickly. And we lost a lot of lives, particularly over the age of 70 years old. A majority of them were over the age of 70. We lost a lot of lives there. And as a result, we're working with the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology to say, how do we do more predictive modeling when it comes to urban land wildfires? How do we give you guys greater notice to be able to warn the public when these things are about to occur based on this wildfire season. We've got a lot of work to do when it comes back to the communications backbone, as I've already said, but here's the other problem that we're facing in this country. And this is not something that's very easy to talk about, but it's called asset poverty. And what we see is that 70% of Americans right now are living paycheck to paycheck. 60% of Americans can't put their hands on $1,000 cash. So how does that translate and impact you guys or FEMA and the assistance that we provide? Here's what happens. You've got senior citizens trying to live in retirement. They're pinching pennies, they pay off their house, and once the house is paid off, they let their fire insurance lapse to have a few hundred extra bucks in their paycheck every month and in retirement. The problem with that is that it escalates the amount of individual assistance that FEMA puts forward to be able to help. And we've got to go back and help people realize that insurance is the first line of defense. Fire insurance is important. Flood insurance is important. And maybe we need to have some honest conversations with the insurance industry about how we actually do an all hazards insurance policy so people aren't having to buy a la carte insurance, that there's comprehensive insurance coverage regardless of the hazard. And then it creates more affordability going forward. And so those are some of the stuff that, some of the conversations that we're starting to push forward. But the speed and quickness in which that fire moved through has got to have, I hope we're having conversations here about how we do evacuations in a very quick nature, and particularly supporting those with functional and access needs or the senior citizens that don't move that quickly. But it's a whole host of things that we've got to do. It's how do we communicate, how do we prepare our public, and something that we've learned from this year is that we've got to put forward a very clear strategic plan for not only FEMA, but we've got to put forward a plan that we're asking the entire community to adopt. All right, we went through, as a result of the 2017 season and some of the major lessons learned, such as loss of communication and not being able to communicate, to understanding that there is nothing more important than the trained first responder, or nothing more important than the trained emergency manager. We couldn't get our hands on enough people. We deployed thousands of federal government employees to support state and local responders out in the field this year, and we got to continue training purposes and figure out how to train more of the masses. We've learned those. We've taken these lessons learned from the 2017 season. We went through, we did comprehensive surveys with our stakeholders. We got 2,300 comments back. We did a trend analysis, and we arrived at 3 goals that I'm going to push while I'm blessed to be in office. And here they are. 1, we're going to create a true culture of preparedness within our citizenry, because it doesn't exist, and you guys see it every day. All right? 2, we've got to do a lot of work to ready the nation for catastrophic disasters, specifically the low to no notice events such as New Madrid earthquakes, Cascadia, Wasatch, California earthquakes. We've got a long way to go, in my opinion, to ready this nation for those low to no notice events. We're pretty good at running logistics and being able to forward deployed teams when there's a 5 to 7 day notice for a hurricane. But how are we going to do it if it triggers right now to be able to roll the number of people that we rolled and the resources that we rolled? And then 3rd, we got to reduce the complexity of FEMA. And I'm going to come back to that. But let's go to the culture of preparedness. I'll share with you a personal story. Most recently, my son was playing in a basketball game. A kid on his team, there was a hard foul. He got thrown into the wall. He stands up screaming. He's got basically a full break right here in his arm. And the whole place was shocked. You could see the shock set in the parents. You could see that nobody was ready to move. Nobody was ready to take action. And luckily, the child's dad is a physical therapist, and I happen to be sitting in the stands. And immediately we go in, start to brace the arm, take care of the kid who's passing out from the pain. And we had to take action. We had to take first response action and get the kid to the hospital as quickly as possible. But when I reflect back on that, I look at the number of people who were sitting there in shock that didn't have the first clue on what to do with that type of break. Well, magnify that for tornadoes, for hurricanes, for floods, when they've lost their homes. How do we build a culture of preparedness within our citizenry and help them to access more training from first aid, give them tangible skills? How do we incorporate them into all the training and exercise that we do to teach them how to aid your response? Let's be honest. with all the active shooter events that are taking place in this country, if you break down the statistics, a lot of the FBI statistics would say that the shootings begin and end, one on the shooter's terms, but they begin and end before first responders can actually, or police officers arrive on scene. So how are we taking the data that we're learning from these events that we're studying and changing our practices, but actually empowering the citizen to become part of the solution and not look at them as a liability all the time? How do we do this? We've got to give them tangible skills. We have to teach them how to properly prepare, and that's going to be one of the major focuses, not just only telling them they need to be properly insured, but here are tangible skills or how to get involved with your fire department or a citizen or a CERT team or whatever it may be to get those skills out there. We're already having conversations at the very high level with the Department of Education. And how do we get set curriculum in schools? How do we do things differently? And in some cases, FEMA keeps telling people to be prepared for 3 days. Go buy food and supplies for 3 days, but yet 70% of our population is living paycheck to paycheck, so it's an unrealistic financial ask. So what are the low to no cost things that we can get citizens to do to be prepared? And that's what we're going to be focusing on there. Next, the catastrophic disasters. It's time to get my people out of the field. What I'm tired of with FEMA is that FEMA is only seen in the local communities during basically the recovery phase. And so we're pushing forward a new initiative. I'm asking my guys to get out of the regional offices. I'm asking them to get out of the headquarters offices. And we're introducing what we're calling FEMA integration teams. And I'm permanently placing my staff and moving my staff out into the field to be part of the training, planning, exercising, and execution every day. I want to be part of the Blue Sky Day discussion, and I want to be there to help you go through response and recovery without having to be forward deployed all the time. And so those are some of the things that we're doing. Here in Region 5, Indiana is going to be the first state to get it within the region, and I believe the second state to get the FEMA integration teams nationally. And then I have a vision for expanding it past just FEMA. Maybe we get rid of the FEMA integration team and we call it a federal integration team. Who are the other players from the federal government that you only see in the response and recovery phase, and how do we get them invited in? How do we get HHS? How do we get HUD? How do we get some of these other agencies in to be embedded with you as a federal coordinated team that's with you all the time, helping you to do real planning, training, and integrated planning, training, and exercise? The second thing is that we got to, I often joke that we got to make continuity great again. All right. When the communication systems are blown out in Puerto Rico, FEMA had to go back navigating by stars and doing things by pencil and paper. We're becoming more and more dependent upon this digital technology that just is extremely fragile. iPause is based on extremely fragile capability. One server goes down, we lose access to 100 million people. You know, there's a lot of things that we have to do. We have to build in redundancy into the communication system. But more specifically, with the nation-state threat that's out there now and dealing with, the nation-state threats from nuclear missiles to cyber attacks, whatever it may be, how do you get your mayor or your county officials to be able to communicate with the governor? And how does the governor communicate with the President of the United States? That's what your COOP plans and your continuity of government plans need to start looking at and addressing, when it comes to truly making sure that we're communicating and understanding that on America's worst day, we have the ability to communicate and we know how it's going to be done when a majority of the information technology that we're using is busted up, blown out, or shut down. So that's what I want you guys focused on in the realm of continuity. And then third, finally, reduce the complexity of FEMA. Federal disaster assistance comes from 17 different federal government agencies in this country, not just FEMA. So we got to streamline not only the disaster assistance that we provide to the disaster survivor, but we've also got to streamline the assistance that we provide to you, the subgrantee, to reimburse you for your equipment. Not only to reimburse you for your equipment, but also the grants that come down to a community to help it rebuild. Over the next several years, we're probably going to pump $40 to $50 billion into Puerto Rico. Recovery plans should help local officials understand what they're entitled to when it comes to the funding that comes down from the federal government as going through a disaster, what they're entitled to, how to establish outcome-driven recovery goals on mitigating their communities, mitigating your fire facilities, mitigating schools. If you're going to get hit, we might as well do this right and utilize the funding to mitigate the communities, and not just FEMA funding, but HUD funding and all the other funding that comes down. How do we do this right so that we create a more resilient local community so that I don't have to keep coming back and doing the same thing over and over and over again? It's a vicious process that we're putting through. The end point of this is 3 simple goals. FEMA's very simple mission is helping people before, during, and after disasters. And ultimately, I'm asking you to help embrace this plan, help us achieve it so that we can have a more prepared and resilient America. That's what I'm asking for. And finally, how does FEMA help you? I think most of you know we have pre-disaster grants, we have post-disaster grants. Not only can we reimburse you, we've got to do some stuff. We've got to sit down. Some of the issues that we learned is how do we reimburse firefighters? How do we reimburse volunteer firefighters for their service when they go out weeks at a time and put away their personal lives and go out for weeks at a time? How do we do this? What laws need to change? What pre-event policies should be in place at your fire department ahead of time so that you can properly get reimbursed from FEMA for the service of going out and helping others? Pay attention to the non-disaster grants too. A lot of this is all designed to help protect, equip, train, and staff firefighters. So we play a big role in that. And I want to leave you with this. I think there's too much of a gap. Some of you as firefighters also serve as the emergency manager. But in my career, I think there's too much of a gap between firefighting and emergency management. We supplement each other. We help one another. And I want to continue to see how we can, work together. I've asked Chief Bryant, Chief O'Neill, Chief Hoover to start working on that, starting very simply on the campus of Emmitsburg at the U.S. Fire Administration. How do we get the firefighters that are there for training to start blending in with the emergency managers there that are there for training? How do we get you guys to interact on our own campuses there or at the CDP so that it trickles down into all these communities and we understand, where we're there? FEMA's not the first responder, but we can damn sure help your first response, your incident command, and help you to execute so that ultimately we save lives and help people. God bless you. Thank you for letting me be here.